welcome to our Rejuvenate dialogue on creative praxis, and we are very excited in Rejuvenate, which is a hub for communication and resources, to be running these 6 international dialogues. So we started with looking at the principles, which we've laid out, and the principles that people felt were important in their work. Went on to the next one about COVID, experiences and recovery. This is our 3rd dialogue. We have 3 more coming up on evidence, gender and uncertainty. So we hope that you'll continue to participate with us. We don't have breakout rooms today, so please be very active in the chat. Just to say that Rejuvenate is hosted at the Institute of Development Studies, and I co-direct that with Tessa Lewin, who's going to be leading this dialogue. And I am at the University of the Highlands and Islands at the Centre for Remote and Sustainable Communities. We run this in partnership, and we have a fantastic team who are participating, including Mariah Cannon and Alice Webb, and I'm going to hand to Mariah. We have fantastic youth facilitators who have been helping us as well. Just to say, we're really keen to have your ideas. Please do contribute to our living archive, which is very accessible. You can add your own work. Please do look at our working paper, which is you're able to download. And what we want to do is really kind of resurface ways of working with children and young people in a more meaningful way and co-constructing a different future with them. So I'm going to hand over to Mariah for some logistics, and then Tessa will be leading us through with a fantastic set of participants today. Thanks.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to see people from all over the world. I can tell by the light that's coming into your rooms. I'm just going to cover some brief housekeeping. If I can move my screen. So if you encounter any technical difficulties or need any support, please feel free to email me or Alice. Our emails are here and we'll pop them in the chat. And then just a couple things. Camera, if you can have your camera on, it's wonderful to be able to see people's faces. We also understand that this isn't an option for everyone. Microphone, we really want to hear from you, but not during other people's presentations. So if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute during presentations and while other people are speaking, that just helps with clarity and letting everyone understand. Chat box, please use the chat box, write questions in it, introduce yourself, write comments. This is a great place to kind of interact with everyone who is with us today. Closed captioning, this is available. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be an icon with a CC in it. Using this icon, you can turn on closed captioning and it's automatically generated. So it may not be perfect, but we hope that it is helpful for anyone who has difficulty understanding us when we are speaking. And last but not least, discussion. As Vicky said, we'd love for there to be a lively discussion. We're not having breakout rooms, so please use the chat box to put in questions. Raise your physical hand, we'll try and see it, or do raise your virtual hand. And then kind of just the last piece of housekeeping is that we will have a survey at the end that we'll put in the chat. So we would absolutely love you to stay just, I think it takes maximum 3 minutes to fill out. And that is all from me. Really looking forward to this presentation. So thank you to our speakers and all our attendees. And I'm going to pass over to Tessa.
Thank you very much, Mariah. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tessa Lewin. I'm one of the co-directors of Rejuvenate with Vicky. It's really nice to see so many of you. Inspired by Heather, who is here, hello. We've decided to keep this really short because we're all kind of zoomed out. So we're going to try and finish within the hour, or we will finish within the hour. I'm not going to introduce everyone extensively. I'm just going to say that I'm very, very excited to have Nabeel Petersen here, who I first met through the Wellcome Trust as a communications fellow. Olu Jenzen, who is at the University of Brighton and who supervised my doctoral dissertation, and among other things, and Veronica Yates, who runs the Wright Studio. And I'm going to let all three of them introduce themselves more substantively, starting with Nabeel. Welcome.
I guess that's my cue. Hi, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting us to join this conversation. I always try and keep my presentation very direct to the needs and what people are interested in. So I do welcome sort of any features in the chat that you'd like to know a little bit more about. Yeah, sorry, my screen just froze. So I wasn't sure if I could begin. So I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa. I was a Wellcome Trust fellow that was really interested in trying to understand storytelling and what would happen when there are different players and different persons with very different bodies of knowledge, let's say from community-based perspective, civic perspective, creative perspectives, academics, and what happens when these sort of bodies of knowledge comes together. So that was the focus of my Wellcome Trust fellowship, which ultimately gave me a position to look at knowledge and power and what that means when developing projects, especially around inclusive pathways to engagement and especially research. What could we do to shift power in research and the reins of research and who sets agendas? And that allowed me then to segue into three different hats post-fellowship. One was I started a company called INTERFER, which I thought I was being smart by playing on the word interfere. And that was just a way to try and interfere with the way research has been done. In my past, I was a participant in different research projects that never sort of fulfilled the loop and never involved me in research agendas. So I thought that was an interesting space to be in. And if I had to be very blunt, I needed a space to quote. So I needed clientele and I needed to quote, so I needed to start a company. And the company still lives. And right now, the company, I work primarily in participation, storytelling, knowledge translation, and then what happens if we shift the dynamic between these sort of themes. And then two of my partners, Joanna Wheeler and Lindsay Reynolds, we started an NGO that was specifically interested in knowledge translation. So what happens at the research producer level to the research consumer level, how can we shift the dynamic to make it more inclusive and to be representative of this entire sort of dynamic in terms of power? So we're interested in egalitarianism, knowledge translation and collaboration, and what happens if we were to design the table ahead of inviting people to the same table. And then thirdly, because I work in the creative sphere in Cape Town as well, we found a lot of issue with being positioned outside the city center, and what could we do to support artists by being in sort of the periphery of the city and selling spray paint, sort of graffiti-based spray paint. And then what would that happen when the community of practice of artists has a space to connect? And how could these sort of three structures, meaning my company, the NGO, and the store, how could they speak to each other and try and build inclusive pathways between, let's say, science artists and then community members, which is a large focus of my work, is trying to shift that dynamic. So all in all, I would say the key or our key interests are looking at participatory research. How do we shift research? And I've been doing projects by looking at the interests of young people. One such project was in partnership with the University of Oxford, and it was shifting an age-old sort of traditional research approach to looking at all these young people are using Facebook. How do we make Facebook sort of the nexus of a research tool by developing or conceiving of Facebook or a closed page as a time capsule developed by aliens that young people interact with. So we looked at just following the thread of their interests, and then within these three bodies, we look a lot at storytelling as an active body of knowledge that shifts, and how can that storytelling be a sort of central node in the research trajectory. And then, of course, we look at collaborations and how to shift existing systems of hegemony and power. So we look at forging relationships with anything from museums to schools to community-based organizations to artists, and how, as a collective, can we try and shift systems to be a bit more inclusive. Yeah, and then through all of these sort of entities, we're looking at how this evolution of practice is shifting amongst all players and partners that subscribe to these entities. And I can speak a little bit about that, but I believe that might come through the conversation. But one such thing is a project we essentially established a little hub. So where young people were invited based on their interests, they entered this hub where they directed how resources are used, what the thematic focus would be, and this was ultimately mental health, and how we could start exploring mental health in a way that is inclusive. Let's throw the DSM-4 out of the table, redesign the DSM-4, well, now 5, and let's have conversations around what anxiety means to us and how we could visualize anxiety so that a lot of people could enter the conversation. In essence, when we started that process, we were then invited to participate in a comic book project called Planet Divak, which is UK-based and Wellcome funded, essentially a project between India, South Africa, and the UK. And we sought to understand young people's experiences during COVID-19 and then present that nuance in a far-fetched comic book that told the story of young people being transported to a foreign planet. Cut that story short, what then happened was young people saw interest in joining the organization. So we're currently looking at isolated young people by their choice, those that applied, to participate in an internship. The internship involves active training in the organization itself, as well as allocating seed funds, which allows young people to explore their interests open-ended, and we become simply a space for them to tease out their ideas and manage their projects. And from that point on, they decide if they want to be employed by the NGO and what their thematic focus should be. So this is how we've looked at working directly with young people to chronicle their stories and then position it in sort of larger frameworks, and then using that body of knowledge to challenge frameworks to be more inclusive, to prove sort of evidence around that. I think I'll stop there. And that sort of introduction to the kind of work we're doing, using all sorts of creative methodologies that are mainly steered by young people themselves.
Thank you very much, Nabeel. I'm going to not take questions now, but move directly to Olu and then Veronica, and then I've got a few questions, and I know Rashmi has a few questions to kind of start the ball rolling, and then we'll open it up to everyone else. Olu, over to you.
So yeah, I'm Olu Jenzen. I'm based at University of Brighton. And in terms of introducing some creative methods that I've used, primarily working with LGBTQ youth on 3 different projects. So the first project I would refer to is the Digital Lives of Trans Youth, which I did back in 2018, 17-18. And then 2 current projects, one which is looking at digital youth work, working with LGBTQ youth during the pandemic. And the second one, which is a project in collaboration with Mermaids UK, supporting trans and gender diverse children and youth and their families, which is about trans and gender diverse youth and community support. So across those 3 different projects, I've worked with a range of different groups using a range of different creative methods. And maybe I should just start with the first one, which was about trans youth digital lives, which automatically makes us think about digital research methods, because it's a project about their digital lives. but actually we worked very analog, just very analog methods in this respect, because it's an ethnographic approach to their digital lives. So it started with the young people themselves as the starting point, and it started with conversations with young people in around some creative activities. And we did that firstly as a group, and the group I entered into was sort of a loosely pre-formed group. So they kind of knew each other, and they kind of did these activities within the setting of a sort of weekly drop-in youth club environment. So they didn't have, you know, very strong bonds with each other, but strong enough in terms of having a sort of quite a direct access into conversation with each other. So we didn't really need to spend a lot of time sort of on warm-up activities or anything like that. They were quite happy just to jump straight in, get the crafts materials out on the table, and then away with that. And I gave them very, very sort of open-ended framework for that. So we can go to the second slide there, please. That's the one we need. Yeah, thank you. In terms of the crafts materials that they could use, we had lots of choices, and I gave them some sort of prompts, if you like, on topics I'd like them to respond to in terms of their daily lives online, but also in terms of, excuse me, exploring gender and sexuality using online resources and environments. So some people then decided to draw, other people decided to, you know, do crafts, paper crafts with glue and a lot of glitter. We got through quite some quantities of glitter. And then other people wanted to do like mood boards, if you like, using Post-it notes and drawings, and others. I had one participant, and you can see the example there in your right-hand corner. They grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and they put pen to paper, and then they just kept writing throughout the session. So they were sort of on the side of the table, not necessarily, you know, participating in the group activities in a hands-on way, but they participated in the banter, in the conversation. But while they were doing that, they were just quietly writing away in prose their thoughts and their reflections. So a wide range of different aspects there. So this was recorded as a group conversation, and it was then the outputs, if you like, the creative outputs were also entered into the data set with their permission. And thirdly, we then took the next step into a one-to-one. If I could have the next slide, please. Right, so the next follow-up session was a one-to-one with self-selected participants who sort of participated in a walkthrough interview. You know, these days, I think this actually got a fancy name from within the methodology vocabulary, but at the time it didn't. So I just called it a walkthrough interview and a show and tell, if you like. So it was a show and tell where we used an iPad or a tablet, which the young person held in their hands that they navigated, and I was sat next to them. And then they talked me through some of the websites and resources, online resources that had come up in the previous session and that they wanted to show me and that they wanted us to talk about a bit further. So we visited, you know, YouTube sites, comics, fun domains, and so on and so forth. The only limitation we set on this was that we did not enter any areas where you need a login. So we didn't enter, you know, where a person needs to sign in using a username and a password. If we came up against that, then I redirected them elsewhere because I did not want them to overshare and it's easily done. In such a situation, we get carried away, we get enthusiastic about the topic. So those were sort of the boundaries that I imposed, if you like. So that was the walkthrough method in terms of exploring trans and LGBTQ, mainly trans young people's online lives and digital lives. Should we go to the next one? Okay. I should say in conclusion on the previous one there, that one of the key findings coming out of that project was the diversity of young people's online lives. And if you look at the existing literature, it's all kind of determined by data produced by the social media sites themselves. So which video is the most clicked on, which piece is the most shared, etc. Those sort of metrics, which kind of stands in for meaningfulness. And we completely challenged that in terms of having a youth and participant-led approach to it, completely different data set, and generated also this insight into the sheer variety of and diversity of their online lives. Okay, sorry, next one. So this is a ongoing project, a collaboration with Mermaids UK, which is early days, and I'm working with Dr. Abby Barris on this one. And we are looking to work with both parents of gender diverse children, as well as gender diverse and trans children and trans young people themselves. But also, and this is one where we sort of are going to hopefully be able to use some creative methods, hopefully also work with them as families. So this idea of collecting data from a family as a unit, if you like, to draw out some of the sort of social interactions within the family as it might present in the data. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but on this note here, I just wanted to link to the 3 S's that Tessa provided us with. This is a workshop that we are sort of using not to collect data, but to collect advice or have input from the young people on the research design itself. So this is really, as I said, really early days. So here we're using creative methods to kind of shape the project rather than collecting data on preset research questions. So this is ideation, if you like, quite a lot of ideation activities going on here. So it's about providing the space for interaction and ideation. This is situated at a residential, so the young people participating here are at a weekend residential, and for many of them, it's the first time that they meet each other as individuals. But for some of them, it's also the very first time they meet another trans young person. So a big deal, if you like. So in this sense, you know, they were a little bit shy with each other, but luckily we timed it. So they have had some other workshops pre-hours. So that has sort of got them going, got the juices going, and they were chatty and bouncing and in a very happy mood when they entered our workshop. So we just basically provide them the materials and the space and just the permission, if you like, to, you know, talk about what they want, ask whatever question they wanted, and come up with ideas. So here we're working with a metaphor of animals. So if, you know, if community was an animal, what animal would it be? So they were making animals in using the different craft materials. And that was just a starting point for our discussion then to shape the research into community and what does it mean to these young people, and then on to community support, what does that mean, etc. So space and support provided. Now structural change, well, as you can perhaps understand structure change is at the heart of this type of project. It's a socially engaged project aimed at empowering young people. But we also saw some structural contestation, if you like, within the workshop itself. And I just wanted to finish on mentioning some incidents where the young people, although they loved the activities and loved the opportunity, they also made sure to assert their own agency. And two examples of that would be that we had some interesting shapes made out of Play-Doh, and they were kind of testing the boundaries with us as facilitators as to how provocative a shape can you make in Play-Doh. So sort of digressing for the idea of the animal into more, let's say, free-ranging, play with the Play-Doh. And just to see our reactions to that. And the other thing was that, again, we had some audio recorders on the table just for note-taking support. And we afterwards, we realized that the young people had found it very amusing to sort of interfere with the audio recording and sort of, I wouldn't call it sabotage, but, to make their mark on the audio recording in an informal and sort of backhand way, whilst the official activities were going on. There was this whole stream of unofficial activities taking place at the same time. And I found that a very lovely and touching example, actually, of how important it is for them to assert their agency. So we come into this with the best intentions. You can see it writ large all over. Let's engage the young people at the design stage of this project. Yet there was actually more room even still for them to claim their agency, clearly signaled through these activities. Right, I'm going to end there, just in the interest of time. I have one more project I can talk about, but we can come back to that in the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Olu. That was great. Veronica, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So I'm Veronica, and I'm the now outgoing director of CRIM, Child Rights International Network, and I'm the co-founder of the Wright Studio. So the Wright Studio is a new creative hub for people and organizations to work at the intersection of human rights and the arts. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about why the Wright Studio. And so the Wright Studio sort of came out of CRIN as a, we're calling it a sister organization. And it started back in, I guess, 2013. My co-founder Miriam should be here too. She can correct me. But in CRIN, we were a bit frustrated by how most NGOs communicate sort of, like the corporate marketing approaches. And so we wanted to hire an artist to think about communicating our work differently, but not just like to raise funds or to make ourselves look really cool, but more to kind of question deeply what we do and what we stand for. And so that started this whole space of, working creatively within children's rights, which wasn't really something that was done. And that sort of grew to be kind of work in and of itself, and in a way it needed, we felt that it would be better to work as a separate organization in a way, right? Where we just took the creative work and focus on the creative work. And when I say creative, we don't mean we're a design agency. It's not about producing artwork, although we may be doing that, but that's not the purpose. It's more thinking about creative in the sort of creation, right? It's about, we're not there to tweak or amend or, abolish. That work happens, on next to us. This is more about what can we create, whether it's creating something from scratch or whether it's thinking about, seeing connections between things that we may not have seen before. So that's sort of how the Wright Studio was born. And now we see the Wright Studio as sort of a playground, right? Where everyone's invited to play. And CRIN is the think tank where we do the policy work, the kind of the legal research and analysis. And I think there was one key element really to the Wright Studio is that we want to see this as an attempt to create a new language. And when I say language, there's, I'm sure many of you know, but there are you meet a lot of people throughout your life who sort of ask you what work you do. And a lot of people have a desire to contribute somehow, right? Whatever the issue might be, but they often don't know how to do it. And NGOs, we are rubbish. We don't actually give them any sort of practical way that they can contribute. Signing a petition or going to a march or whatever, that doesn't mean anything really. That can happen, but that's not something that will make people feel like they are actually contributing to something. And part of that is we take everything for granted, that we know what we're doing and that's right. Whether it is or not, I'll leave that to the side. But I think it's also part of the language that we use, you know, down to the words and the jargon and the way we talk about change. So in the Wright Studio, we really want to think about, can we create a new language that is more open, that is less didactic, and that invites all kinds of collaborations. And then now what we're trying to kind of focus on is also what is the bridging work between the Wright Studio and CRIN or other NGOs, right? So in a way, at the Wright Studio, we're sort of freeing ourselves from the constraints of, you know, the structure, the NGOs and the work that is expected of you, but also working within, you know, language and treaties and processes and systems that you think you can change, and then you realize, no, we can't change it, but we can maybe step aside and try and create something new, you know, that could challenge things from a different place, where we can start without assumptions. And this is in a way where art comes in, right? Because it's about questioning deeply, breaking assumptions, etc. So this is something that, you know, that's quite key, also in the way that they can then open collaborations to people in other professions, right? And coming back to this language and people wanting to contribute, art is a perfect tool for this, because it doesn't tell you this is what you need to believe in, or this is how you need to do things, or this is the goal. This is more about how do we use kind of our emotions, our professions, our skills, everything to contribute something. And so you can do that in a more open way. And then finally, I guess one of the aims, or one of the aims, I guess, that we gave ourselves is that, could we also approach everything we do in the Wright Studio artfully? So meaning, could the Wright Studio become in and of itself an art form? So not just producing, you know, beautiful artwork or projects, but also how we build relationships, how we collaborate, how we, you know, everything that we do, could that become an art form? An art form in the sense of this something we have to practice, get better at, improve, come back, sort of constant work in progress. And I'll stop there. That's us.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Veronica. Yeah, I was just thinking about like how that works with performativity and iteration, and kind of connecting that to the idea of process and emergent stuff. I mean, I guess many of us are involved in creative praxis to survive, and to kind of connect, but also to, I often see it as a kind of an architecture or a scaffolding that takes the pressure off some of the kind of being or performing, because you're kind of focused on doing. And I think that resonates with your idea of process rather than product pretty well. I'm going to hand over to my co-facilitator, Rashmi, because I think I had some questions, but they've mostly been answered in the presentations. And then I'm going to open up if anyone else has any questions or contributions, or if anyone of you panel members wants to ask other people stuff as well. Rashmi.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all for those amazing presentations. It's just incredible to hear the work that you've been doing. I just had a few questions, and they're mostly around the idea of sort of transitioning from the 3 Ps to the 3 S's, because I think that each of your experiences link quite strongly to each of the 3 S's, and then also linking creative practice into that. And I think I'll actually start with Veronica just while that's fresh. So I guess the main thing that I wanted to ask you about was just hearing a little bit more about how, I mean, on the topic of performing and being in the like temporal structure that society kind of imposes on us, and how the Wright Studio is trying to challenge that. More specifically, how do you think that sort of challenging temporalities and doing things differently in this way, and by integrating creativity and art into this, how do you think that this can sort of change children's and young people's rights and feelings of agency? And, you know, ability for decision making as well?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say that adults need those skills too, but I mean, I'm going to come back, I guess, to the core of what we're trying to do at the Wright Studio, but also thinking about it. We talk about arts, and in the same way we talk about creativity in a broader sense of the word. We also want to think about art in that way, right? It's not just a piece of art. It's everything that art is. Maybe I can explain a little bit, but I guess within the understanding of art, there are I sort of see 3 ways of being, right, which could relate to our work. And so, you know, one of them, very often art is kind of it's where questioning takes place, right? It's where we rebel. It's where we don't start from the assumptions. We start from, you know, a sort of more open space. This is where critical thinking is. This is where we challenge the status quo. This is, you know, artists are often people on the margins, people who start conceptualizing things before we've put a definition to them, right? So this is just that, thinking about the space that we can be in, you know, thinking about art in that way. And then I guess another element is if we think about it as a skill, right? And so you can take any art form, but also a way of being, or even, you know, the martial arts, for example, right? And if we think about the sort of ancient definition of the martial arts, for example, it's about, you know, developing skill over time. And you have the same, you know, idea with whatever your art form might be. It's about working and reworking and developing your skill over time and getting better at it. It's about experimenting. It's about, you know, using the senses. It's about your intuition. It's about, you know, it's exploring other forms of knowledge, as Nabeel had talked about a lot, right? And so, and once you develop your skill, you are then in a place where you can work more from a place of humility and openness. And then that takes us to the third area, I guess, where I want to call it improvisation, but we can relate that to sort of, you know, we are in a place of uncertainty. And oftentimes what happens at least in many of our jobs, I guess, is that we have to work to goals and outcomes and deadlines and funding proposals, etc., which are often not very much aligned with reality of what you feel you should be doing. And so if we develop those skills, you know, that, you know, artful skills, then you are in a better position to improvise. And so I want to talk about jazz, for example, right? And jazz musicians are, you know, musicians who have to, you know, they have to develop their skill and, you know, all of the skills, but these skills also include listening and sensing and working in collaboration. You know, how is the, you know, depending on your instrument, and you can only improvise once you have those skills, right? You don't start by improvising in jazz. It's a disaster. I've tried it. It doesn't work, right? So you have to develop those skills. I never got to that, but I tried. And so, you know, if you think about improvisation in that way, then you learn to adapt, right? And I think that this is a frustration we often have in the NGO world, is that we're trying to go against the system, we're trying to go against the current. We think we can change things when often we can't change them, but we can, if we have those skills and if we have that space and the questioning and the humility, then we can go with the flow. And these are all skills that activists, whether adults or children, if we could work from that way, I mean, it would change so many things, right? So that's, I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's kind of what, you know, what that made me think of. Yeah.
Thank you so much. No, it absolutely does. I think that's such a comprehensive way of putting it. And I also love the jazz metaphor. I can relate to that one as well. And I think linking to that as well, I just wanted to follow up on the idea that the Wright Studio is a place where you can create a new language through arts as well. On the topic of language, if we're talking about moving from the 3 Ps to the 3 Ss and participation is turning into system change, what are your thoughts on the term participation and the connotations around it?
I've never liked that word. And it's unfortunately become an NGO program rather than a way of working. And so in a way, we're not the Wright Studio, even though we've come out of children's rights and it's still very much the core of why we exist. We're not actually calling ourselves a children's rights organization or human rights. It's more about, you know, how to be a better human, I guess. But it's we actually want to approach it from an intergenerational perspective. So it's thinking about, we're not inviting children because our donor told us and we can tick a box and say, look, children spoke, or look, it's not about asking children to draw something really cute and then go, look, we did it, you know, they drew something. It's more about how do we work together with them? And so how do we change? Because we also want to start thinking about future generations, but also our ancestors, right? Because the work we're doing today is building on generations before. And so it's about looking, okay, what did they do that was really effective that we can take, you know, the wisdom that they've transferred, and then what is it that children today can actually bring to the table that we've forgotten how to do. Probably a lot of those working artfully, children usually still have those abilities. They haven't yet been, you know, programmed too much into thinking rationally. And what, you know, what is our impact? What are we building for the future generations? So that's actually how we want to approach it, intergenerational work. It's not actually about your age, but we want everyone to also be able to be at the table. Yeah.
Definitely. No, thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. I think I will move on to asking Olu a question now, if that's all right. And I guess this also links to the idea of intergenerational work, because I mean, we're linking your work to support and the idea that in order for young people to thrive, they need that support. But my question is sort of, how do you make sure that as adults giving support to young people to find their agency, how do you make sure that the boundary isn't crossed and that ideologies of sort of provision and protection don't prevail in the work that you do with them?
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess that's both a question on the sort of on the practical side, isn't it? In the sense of you know, the safeguarding of the participants, and sometimes we need to think really creatively and around that as well. But also, like you were saying, that it then creates a dynamics where in which, you know, you need to allow freedom of expression as well, and allow the messiness. I think, you know, the messiness of it needs to be given space and to come through in that sense, and the willingness to go with that type of inquiry where you are led by the youth participant in this case, I think is also important. But sometimes, you know, you kind of, it's difficult and you need to query these things, because there's also unpronounced expectations, I think, sort of floating about. I did one project with a group of LGBTQ youth. It was a filmmaking project. So they workshopped, you know, ideas and scripts and everything like that. And then I was just going to be there and support them to use the TV studio to shoot a short film. So basically, again, I left it very open-ended in terms of what type of film they could make. So we had decided on the topics, right? but it could end up being, you know, a talk show. It could end up being a comedy. It could end up being animation. It could end up being, you know, it was completely free in that sense. And they very clearly and firmly came back to me with, this is a piece of advocacy. We're making an advocacy film. And these are the audiences we have identified, you know, so, and I felt, you know, is that how I've influenced them? You know, am I sort of pushing them in a particular direction in terms of, am I sending out subtle signals about political meaningfulness and, you know, what have you? But at the end of the day, I have to leave that question unanswered because I will never really get to the bottom of it. I think I just have to accept that they were dead set on making an advocacy film, and they just went away, wrote the script, shot the film, edited, and then really keen to get it under the nose of their identified audiences, you know. So they were clearly activist-minded. And I just had to go with that, although that wasn't necessarily what the project was about, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's a balance, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think it also links to what Veronica was saying about the importance of sort of artistic freedom and how that can give you the scope for young people to sort of be active decision makers. And even if we as sort of adults can't always, you know, be sure that we're not overstepping, I think acknowledging that in the first place is, you know, the really important thing. So thank you. And finally, I will just ask Nabeel a question relating to space and your work on the comic book project as well. And one thought that popped up in my mind was the difference between spaces that young people can become involved in. So they can be sort of like the comic book project where they've been invited to get involved, or they can be claimed, like perhaps in political movements. And I guess I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on the impact on these different types of spaces that young people can get involved in, and then also how you feel that combining creative practice with these spaces, how you feel this can sort of foster feelings of agency and decision making as well.
Okay, I'm going to try and answer that question by hopefully making an example. So I really liked what Veronica said about speaking around learning a new language, that, you know, when we try to create something artfully and intentionally, it need not mean that we're trying to predetermine and predefine. With the Young and Curious project, full disclosure, we're in application for a larger hub project, which allowed us very limited resources by the Wellcome Trust. What we sought to do was simply put a call out for young people interested in exploring, and we use the word curiosity, meaning there's nothing else, that there's no steering from our end. We were just curious as to what young people wanted to explore and how they chose to explore that. So we aligned our funds to a space, to establishing a space, and it simply meant a regular space that young people could access with or without us, where they could tackle various issues. We wanted to work on mental health, but we also sort of opened up the space that we need not work on mental health because all of us are facing various intergenerational traumas from past and future and current. And what is it you're interested in? So I think in terms of an invited audience, we put a call out on very different mediums. And we had about a group of 30 activated young people that we said in any means that is publishable, that you can send your motivation to us. It could be a letter, it could be an audio, sort of a voice note, you know, those atrocious 10-minute voice notes that on WhatsApp. Or anything. So young people, you know, they chose, and unfortunately we couldn't make this work for the period, I think, of about 4 months. And in terms of an invited space, our only condition was we have slightly limited resources, but that means we only have a little bit of money that we could stretch out as a stipend, you know, as a transport stipend and a food stipend. That is our limitation, and in terms of booking other venues. What they then chose to do was, yes, we want to work on mental health, we want to challenge the way that we are never invited to the conversation or excluded simply because of the language that is used, because of sort of any issues related to transport, etc., which always means we're late. If it's online calls, it means data. In the different areas that we live in, we can't access the space. So we get invited, but we can't bring our voices forward. So in conversation with the young people, we sort of understood that by inviting them to the table, we're still inviting them to a structure, which means we still have the power that we do not want. So ultimately, we sort of had to jump back and say, hey, this is an idea that we're keen on, this is how much money we have, how do we make this work? Let's not invite you to the table, let's draw the table out, figure out how this table stands, what the height of the table is in terms of for various persons' access, and then let's start talking about what we want to do and how we want to do it. And our position, sort of, I don't want to say the leadership, but let's say the adults or the more experienced ones, our position was simply managing administration. So let's say if we're having this event, doodle evening, and we're putting 50% of our budget toward that, it simply means we only have this pocket left for the next thing that you choose to do. So in terms of invited space and claim spaces, what we found really interesting was the agenda was set by young people and how they chose to be engaged with. You know, these are the days we want to come forward. This is the kind of activities. We want to use art in different forms. We want to be exposed to different artists so that our conception of art changes. So it meant that every other week we had a new art form introduced. You know, like this week Jack is coming and doing clay molding. Next week, Catriona is coming and she's doing sort of fine art, painting. And then that gave them this, excuse my words, gave them, but it allowed this inventory of different methods that everyone could then sort of step away and then look at how they choose to express themselves, which meant the table was constructed. Then we could have the conversation. And ultimately what this group of individuals who nominal, I think everyone's an activist when given time. Often our daily lives doesn't afford us time to reflect. They chose to have external events, so a doodle evening where they want, this is the first event they chose. I think we had about 50 people a month before COVID hit us. And they invited teachers, academics, very senior psychiatric staff, other schools, and it was funny because they chose to put 7 tables up and they isolated 7 themes, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, trauma. And then people moved from one table to the other with any arts materials available, and they started talking about what these issues were. And I remember my mom came to this event, and my mom was saying, like, this 14-year-old was talking to me about anxiety. What do they know about anxiety? But my mom came home acknowledging that she felt anxious her entire life, which she never had the time to think about her anxieties and sort of the past. So what I found interesting in terms of invited and claim space was the young people chose to engage outwardly, first to design the table, and then engage outwardly with various other audiences, invite them in, and then come back to the table and reflect on what happened and what they could do next. And I think in terms of space and artful intentionality, Veronica, I'm going to steal that. In terms of that, I think that was a really good example of what could happen when they afforded space. And they ultimately made all the decisions until the budget was depleted, and they did so much more than what we could. I hope I answered all the.
No, definitely. Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. I'm aware that we've got a few minutes left. So Tessa, do we want to open the floor, or?
Are there any burning quick questions? Otherwise, I'm kind of seeing these as kind of provocations for future engagements, and I hope we're kind of building a community of people that will carry on talking to each other. I actually, Olu, I wanted you to share a story about effective objects, because I found that really touching. And I also have a son who's 8 and has always carried, he has to have something, like it changes, but he has you know, an object that he takes with him everywhere that he kind of holds on to for dear life for that day, and invests with all kinds of meaning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just very briefly, then I'll hand back to Vicky to close.
Yeah. I think it relates to what we were talking about earlier in terms of how creative methods can be useful sometimes just to preoccupy the hands, right? So the influence that has on the type of conversations that you have. So sometimes, you know, a very simple activity with no particular sort of outcome as its aim can be very useful and indeed, you know, meaningful in that sense. So I think some of the craft stuff that we've done has been in around that, you know, in terms of just taking the pressure off the conversation and preoccupying the hands with something. And but then in a follow-up session, it transpired that a young person had taken this little bracelet that they made away, and they kept it with them every day or all day through the week as a sort of way of reminding them that it's only a week to go to next time they will get to you know, hang out with the other young people at the youth centre. And we didn't realize beforehand how such a small object can sort of take on a sort of almost talismanic power, in that sense that every time it was basically rough for this person to get through the week in school, etc., in those other less friendly environments for a gender diverse person, and so we just kept that item as a reminder that only, you know, 4 days to go, 3 days to go, 2 days to go, until the next time I get to have this same experience again, and, you know, maybe make some other new trinkets or what have you. But it was just an insight, I guess, an observation that not to underestimate the sort of when these things are set in a sort of everydayness environment, not to underestimate the sort of the power and the value that these activities and items may have for, well, in this case, young people that we work with. Yeah, I guess that is just a takeaway point that was unexpected, I think.
Thank you very much, and thanks all three of you, and Rashmi as well. It was really, really lovely. I promised I would end at 1. I lied. I'm sorry. It's 1 minute past 1. Vicky, over to you just to close, and thanks everyone. Yeah. It was really lovely to see you all.
So thank you, and there's been really active chat. So we'll just had a request to share that chat. If you would like something you've said not to be shared, please let Mariah know. The other thing is, please fill in the evaluation, because we've gone from a very active lot of breakout groups in our first group to people being a bit tired of Zooms and breaking out to not having breakouts. So could you fill in your evaluation, what you like doing and how you like to communicate? And we really look forward to meeting you all on future dialogues, and please contribute any ideas that you want into Rejuvenate. And thank you so much for your time, and that was really inspiring. Thank you so much to our speakers and facilitators.
Yeah, and Alice and Mariah, also thank you for running everything so smoothly. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. Cool. Thanks everyone, and we will be writing this up and sending it out, and hopefully seeing many of you again soon. Cool. Thank you
so much.
Cheers.